The Olympic Games exist to celebrate the greatest athletes in the world, the finest competitors, the pinnacle of human physical achievement, the demonstration that the human body, when trained to its absolute limit, is capable of extraordinary things. The 1904 Olympic Marathon was none of these things. It featured a man who stopped to eat apples from a roadside orchard and spent 20 minutes being violently ill in a ditch. A man who was administered rat poison as a performance enhancement by his own support team. A man who crossed the finish line first, having spent 11 of the 32 miles sitting comfortably in a car. 2 men who had never run a marathon in their lives. And 1 extended dog attack. It is the greatest single sporting disaster in the history of the Olympic movement. And every single word of it is completely, verifiable, true. St. Louis, Missouri, the summer of 1904. The marathon course was just under 25 miles of unpaved Missouri roads in 90-degree August heat. Let me be precise about the conditions, because every one of them matters. There was 1 water station on the entire 24.85-mile course. 1. This had been a deliberate decision by the race organisers, who believed that studying the effects of dehydration on athletic performance would produce interesting scientific data. This belief was correct. The data it produced was that depriving people of water in 95-degree heat causes them to collapse, hallucinate, and vomit. The roads were packed Missouri clay that turned to fine red dust under vehicle wheels. Several official automobiles drove the course ahead of and alongside the runners continuously, each one churning up thick clouds of choking dust, settling directly onto the athletes competing behind them. The course also included 7 significant hills, because the organisers apparently felt the other elements were insufficient. 32 men lined up at the starting line. 14 of them would finish. The other 18 would be stopped by vomiting, physical collapse, hallucination, accidental poisoning, a dog attack, or circumstances the official records describe in terms suggesting the organisers had genuinely not thought to anticipate them. Of all the competitors in the 1904 Olympic Marathon, perhaps the most remarkable was Felix Carvajal, a Cuban postal worker from Havana who had decided, entirely on his own initiative and with minimal resources, that he was going to run in the Olympic Games. He raised his travel fund by running laps around the main square in Havana while a crowd gathered and collected donations. This took several weeks. He raised enough to get to New Orleans. In New Orleans, Felix gambled away essentially all of his remaining money in a card game. He hitchhiked the rest of the way to St. Louis, arriving with essentially nothing. He showed up at the marathon starting line still wearing his street clothes. A sympathetic American athlete produced a pair of scissors and cut Felix's trousers off at the knee. This was the full extent of Felix Carvajal's pre-race preparation. Felix set off at a cheerful, conversational jog, occasionally stopping to chat with spectators, and paused at approximately the halfway point at a roadside orchard to eat several apples from an overhanging branch. The apples were rotten. Felix spent the next 20 minutes being comprehensively ill in a ditch by the side of the road. He resumed running. He finished 4th in the Olympic marathon. Felix Carvajal is, by any reasonable measure, the most magnificently unconquerable competitor in the history of the Games. Thomas Hicks was the American favorite, a genuine, properly prepared competitive athlete who had trained seriously for this event. By mile 12, in the brutal August heat and the choking dust clouds, he was struggling badly. His support team made a decision that modern sports medicine would describe as both catastrophically dangerous and straightforwardly criminal. They gave him strychnine. Strychnine sulfate, better known to most people as rat poison, was used in tiny doses as a stimulant by some athletes in the early 20th century. The thinking held that a sub-lethal dose would stimulate the nervous system and improve endurance. What strychnine actually does, as Thomas Hicks discovered over the following 20 miles, is cause progressive hallucinations, involuntary muscle spasms, and a deteriorating capacity to distinguish what is real from what is not. His support team administered multiple doses throughout the race. They mixed the strychnine with raw egg whites and brandy, which they apparently considered a reasonable delivery vehicle for rat poison in the context of an Olympic marathon. For the final miles of the race, Thomas Hicks was moving through a landscape he could no longer accurately perceive. He was also, technically speaking, in the lead. Meanwhile, at approximately mile 9 of the race, an American runner named Frederick Laws had developed severe leg cramps and dropped out of the competition. He accepted a lift in a support vehicle. He rode comfortably for approximately 11 miles, watching the race unfold around him. When the vehicle developed mechanical problems approximately 5 miles from the finish line, Laws got out, discovered that his leg cramps had apparently resolved themselves during the ride, and started jogging toward the stadium. He crossed the finish line first. The crowd in the Olympic Stadium erupted. Officials rushed forward. Alice Roosevelt, the daughter of President Theodore Roosevelt himself, stepped forward to place the laurel wreath upon his head. A photographer captured the image. At this precise moment, someone in the official press enclosure raised a question. It was pointed out, with some urgency as the gold medal was being produced, that multiple official course observers had clearly and unmistakably witnessed Frederick Laws sitting in a moving automobile approximately 45 minutes earlier. The laurel wreath was removed from his head. Laws was banned from competition for life. The ban was subsequently reduced to 1 year, possibly because even the officials found it difficult to sustain appropriate levels of outrage about something this comprehensively absurd. Thomas Hicks crossed the finish line 3 hours, 28 minutes and 53 seconds after the race began. He required 4 doctors at the finish line. He could not stand without being supported under each arm by 2 officials. His face was the color of ash. His eyes were barely tracking. He had been hallucinating for the final several miles. He had also, by the technical standards of Olympic competition, won the gold medal. The International Olympic Committee awarded it to him. They noted the strychnine in their official records. They did not strip the medal. Anti-doping regulations in 1904 were, as one might most generously characterize them, at a very early stage of development. Thomas Hicks went home to Massachusetts. He recovered. He never competed in the Olympics again. The gold medal sat on his mantelpiece for the rest of his life. A physical object commemorating the day he won the most comprehensively terrible race in competitive athletic history, primarily by being the only person willing to keep moving. 4 doctors attended to Thomas Hicks at the finish line. Their medical report describes his condition in clinical language that is somehow more alarming for its restraint. He was treated for acute exhaustion, severe dehydration, and the cumulative physiological effects of having been administered multiple doses of strychnine sulfate mixed with raw egg whites and brandy over 3.5 hours of extreme physical exertion in 95-degree heat. He recovered fully. He returned to Massachusetts with the gold medal. He never competed internationally again. The official report noted that his condition at the finish line was, in the medical judgment of the attending physicians, extremely serious. He had, nonetheless, technically won. There is something almost admirable in that, in a completely deranged sort of way. The rest of the field is, if anything, even more extraordinary. 2 South African runners, Len Tonyane and Jan Mashiane, were present in St. Louis not as trained Olympic competitors, but as Tswana tribesmen appearing in a Boer War exhibition at the World's Fair. They had never run a marathon in their lives. Someone suggested, somewhat impulsively, that they enter the Olympic race. They agreed. Len Tonyane finished 9th. He would almost certainly have finished considerably higher had he not been chased approximately a mile off the official course at around mile 14 by a large and apparently deeply committed dog. He rejoined the course and kept running. Jan Mashiane finished 12th. Both men, entering a race they had never trained for on a course they had never seen, outperformed the majority of the dedicated competitive athletes in the field. William Garcia of California was found collapsed on the course, bleeding internally. He had inhaled so much red Missouri road dust over 24.85 miles that it had abraded the lining of his stomach. He survived. 4 competitors simply never appeared at the finish line. The official records describe them as having withdrawn from competition. The circumstances of their withdrawal are not recorded. Of the 32 men who started, 14 finished. The other 18 were defeated by the heat, the dust, the hills, the dogs, the apples, the rat poison, or the car. The 1904 Olympics are studied today primarily as a demonstration of how not to organize an international sporting event. But there is something worth sitting with underneath the catalogue of disasters. Everything that went catastrophically wrong in 1904, eventually, given enough time and enough consequences, made something better. The water station disaster directly inspired the modern hydration protocols that protect marathon runners at every major race today. The course standards were rewritten after a formal inquiry, and the strychnine question, the rat poison administered to Thomas Hicks on a Missouri road in August of 1904, is, in a direct line of intellectual descent, one of the founding incidents of the anti-doping movement in professional sport. The World Anti-Doping Agency, the banned substances list, the testing protocols that govern every major athletic competition on Earth today. All of it has a line that runs back, in part, to a man called Thomas Hicks, jogging through hallucinations outside St. Louis because his support team thought rat poison was a reasonable training aid. Things go comprehensively wrong in ways that, eventually, make everything better. And Felix Carvajal. Felix returned to Cuba and continued running. He ran in the Boston Marathon. He ran in the 1906 Intercalated Games in Athens. He ran through the streets of Havana for the rest of his life, because he loved running, and because the details of financing and dietary caution regarding roadside fruit were the kind of details that Felix Carvajal was constitutionally, joyfully, completely unable to prioritize above simply getting out there and going. He is, I think, exactly the kind of person history should remember rather more than it does. History is stranger than anything we could make up. Next week, considerably more molasses than anyone has any right to expect. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you Thursday.